As usual, a good morning with the traffic on the road. Nothing new for Bangalore. We are all used to it. Uh, I can understand at least equal size of the crowd is just outside the office waiting to get in. Obviously, they are late due to the traffic, but we can't delay the opening further. So, first of all, thanks a lot for all the colleagues who are here on time, beating the Bangalore traffic. Thank you. A big round of applause to all of you for coming in here. Overall, when we started the registration, it took almost 3 to 4 days, and unfortunately, we had to regret the, let's say, the registrations because we were full. Due to the logistics, we were able to accommodate around 400 plus registrations, so we had to say no to around another 400 to 500 people, so that's a huge number. So thanks a lot for all the interest. How's the day shaping up? We'll have a lot of sessions. After me, we'll have Frederic giving us the details on UI5 evolution. We have sessions, especially by colleagues like DJ, who will talk about the functional programming techniques for UI5. Then we also have a couple of tracks wherein you can get to know a little bit more, get into the details, ask the experts. There will be sessions on the how to develop UI5 apps, or you can put your queries to the experts there. We also have the demo pods outside. So it's a jam-packed day for you. It will go till almost 6:30. And then after that, we have high tea and the networking session. So we hope to see you all there like this, fresh till the end of the day. Uh, After, yes, we go back to our Bangalore traffic to the home, so that's the usual thing. But we will try to see what best we can do to keep you fresh with the interesting sessions which we have. This event in Bangalore is the first time which we are doing. We had UI5con in Germany this year as well as the last year. We had close to 400 plus participants there as well, both the years. So this is the size of an event in Bangalore for the first time. So a big round of applause for the organizers who have made it possible. I'm pretty sure in the evening you guys will breathe a sigh of relief. I'm pretty sure about that because it's not easy to organize such an event on this scale. So thank you guys. Obviously, again, thanks to the sponsors who have let this event happen because again, this scale of event, not possible with some funds here. So thanks to those guys. And obviously to the facilities team in the labs to host in the beautiful auditorium here. This is a new building which SAP has come up with. Last year we inaugurated this, and that's really nice to see this kind of auditorium here. Without further ado, I will hand it over to my colleague, Frederic, to give us details on the UI5 evolution. So he is leading the UI5 development teams. A big round of applause for Frederic.
Thank you, Mitesh.
Hope to hear you some interesting stuff here, and especially for the colleagues here.
I think so. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Hi. So great to see so many of you. I already had to learn that one of the big topics here is traffic. In the mornings, in the evenings, we all talk about traffic, so that's something special here. So thanks for coming and showing up so early, right? Today we brought you, I think, a lot of really great content. How many of you are UI5 developers or have already done something with UI5? That's almost all of you. That's really good. So I think today you will learn quite a lot of things which are really relevant for your day-to-day jobs, really, right? Just yesterday I met with some folks and we already exchanged some ideas, and it's really stuff that you should all know. So coming here was definitely a good idea. So let's get started right away. I'll cover some of the, let's say, the standard UI5 news first, but then we'll get into the main topic, which is UI5 evolution, right? And this will be, let's say, one of the key topics of today. So first up, let's give you some updates on things that we did recently. One of the things we showed last year at UI5con in Germany was the new demo kit. I mean, you all probably know the demo kit, and this has evolved quite nicely over the years. This was one of the first like major design overhauls that we did. And when we rolled it out last year, we were glad that it finally came up in this shape, but we had some issues with it still, some performance-related problems and so on. Now we've enhanced it quite a bit. So the performance is really, really nice these days. There's a couple of new features, and maybe actually we can switch to the laptop. I'll show you some things which we've done. Let's. Good. Yeah. Oh, I have to, of course, plug in HDMI. Just a second. Okay, let's give it a try again. Yeah, it's good that we do the demo now, but. Something is happening. Good. Perfect. Okay, great. So this is the new demo kit, as you know it. So there's a couple of things I just want to show you this quickly. For once, one of the important things that we were always asked to provide is a way to go from one version to the other, right? Because usually you don't just work in one particular patch version of UI5, but you have to access different versions depending on the project you're working on. So up here in the top right corner, you now have the option to actually switch to any of the previous versions of the demo kit, right? So this is a very simple switch, and then you can go back and really read the API instructions and stuff for this particular version. So a small enhancement, but something that was always asked for. Another thing is people asked us, can we get a download of all of the contents in PDF format, for example, to be able to read it on the train or somewhere else? So that's now also possible. There's a download option that gives you all of the content to share with somebody or so, or to read, as I said, offline. Then the rest of the demo kit's, let's say, structure is pretty much the same. You still have access to all of the documentation. That's normal, right? But we have enhanced, in particular, the samples and the API reference section quite nicely. So if you look at the samples, for example, here there's let me open one. For example, the flexible column layout, right? So if you look at this sample right here, we introduced something that I think is quite important. You have now a link to the documentation of this particular control, but as well to the UX guidelines, right? And this is new. So you can jump directly to the experiencesap.com site that explains to you how to actually use this control in the context, right? So this is a simple link, but it's really important because usually people didn't know exactly in which cases to use a control, how to use it, when not to use it, and all of this is now linked wherever possible directly from the demo kit, right? Then for some of the more basic topics, right, for something like SAP UI base, sorry, of course under API reference, okay. Something simple, right? A small addition. For these particular APIs, you now have also an indication of in which control library this object is, what is the visibility, and so on. So just a couple of smaller enhancements, but overall you see the performance is quite nice, and I think we addressed most of the topics. So this was basically, let's say, the main improvements on the demo kit side. Okay, I think we can now go back to the slides. Good. So the next topic that we showed also last year for the first time are the supportability tools. So some of you might have already seen this. There's something called Support Assistant, right? You can reach it with this infamous shortcut, Control-Alt-Shift-P. It brings up a screen, and then there's a Support Assistant button on this. This was enhanced lately, which we also did after a lot of feedback. And basically what this does is you can see it on the bottom of the screen. It basically brings you an in-place assistant that checks the application for typical faults, right? So, for example, you have a performance problem in your application, or you just want to see if it's built according to the best practices of UI5 these days. You can just start the support assistant, and you let it run, and it actually checks the runtime of your application and tries to find out if there's any, let's say, violation to typical patterns that we want to promote. And you get them listed down below, and you can basically fix them one by one, right? It's like a to-do list for your application in terms of fixing it, supporting it a little bit better, right? So we improved this tool quite a bit. If you haven't used it yet, please go ahead and try it out. We also improved the diagnostics tool, right? It's something that we've had for a very long time. There are some new plugins in here, especially if you work with Fiori elements. Please have a look at this. There are some enhancements in here. There's also something called UI5 Inspector. It's a Chrome plugin that you can install that basically when you have a UI5 app open and you click on this Chrome plugin, it inspects your page and it gives you an outline where you can directly, let's say, click on a particular control in the page, modify its properties and so on from within the Chrome plugin. It's a really nice way to play around with settings of controls, to not have to do this via the command line, for example, or via the console, right? So this is also a nice tool, and this will be released with new theming support, and so this project is still active and we're working on it. Then for controls, if you go back 3, 4, 5 years, I mean, all we did was building controls, basically. It was the main business to support all of the Fiori apps, right? We've sort of toned this down a bit. There are just a few controls here and there that we need to build these days because we already have hundreds and hundreds of them. So some of the things we did lately was improvements to existing controls like the planning calendar. I'll show a demo of this tool in a second. We have a palette control. We enhanced the Fiori to-the-door controls to a certain degree. We aligned object page header, for example. On the right-hand side, you see something that's called info label control. This info label control is just a small enhancement, but I think a nice control for most applications when you want to display data with a semantic, let's say, flavor, right? One of the bigger topics was the rich text editor. So down below, you see a screenshot of something that we have built based on the tiny MCE rich text editor framework, right? And it's a really powerful tool. It's one of the best rich text editors in the industry, and it was always part of UI5. But it did not embed nicely with the SAP M libraries because it came with its own toolbar and it sort of looked foreign. And so what we did is we actually integrated still tiny MCE, but we replaced all of the functionality with Fiori compliant controls. So now if you embed it, it really fits in nicely with the page. And this was also a bigger investment, but I think really worthwhile because this now provides some great functionality to applications. And for something pretty new and exciting, we introduced a new drag and drop concept in UI5. And drag and drop has always been, let's say, on our minds. And we have had several different controls that implemented drag and drop over the past years. And each individual control developer had to come up with a way how to understand when something is dragged and is dropped, and they all built it themselves, right? And we said we will actually provide a central functionality for drag and drop support straight out of UI5. So basically, you can now enable any of your controls to be drag and drop enabled, right? And there are some controls that already support this. And for this, maybe let's switch back to the laptop. So if I go to samples right here and you just search for something like drag, there's a list of controls that shows up already. So some of them have examples that support drag and drop, right? One of the ones that I wanted to show you is the planning calendar. So if you go into such a page now, you usually find an example like this one that somehow relates to drag and drop. And in here, you can see how it works. So we enable this particular control that did not have the drag and drop functionality, but now you can go ahead and take a simple task and just, for example, move it around in your calendar, right? And this is possible for like a number of controls now. For example, in the icon tab bar, we have, let's show the tabs drag and drop example. You can now take, for example, a tab and just move it around up here, right? And put it to a different position. You get a callback, and then you can persist this change as well, right? So you can basically add this on top of any control now and have a drag and drop experience really nicely without having to worry about how technically that actually works, right? Good. Then we go back to the slides. Good. Let's spend a couple of minutes on the flexibility services. There's a booth set up at 10:15 later on where you can really learn a lot about this in detail. So today I'll just briefly mention what it is, but it's really worth looking into this. Flexibility services is SAP's answer to the problem that many customers tell us that if they have received an application from SAP, it's usually okay because it's not perfect for them. The labels might not be exactly what they need in their particular business, right? It's maybe not a business partner, maybe it's just a contact or something like this. So they have a different wording for some of the terms on the screen. Sometimes we delivered a certain number of fields and they find out they only need 60% of the fields, right? And in the past, it was an IT job to remove these fields. And now we say it's up to the LOB or to, let's say, a particular user in the company that can now do these sort of changes, right? So one of these personas is the business expert. We call it the key user. It's someone in the enterprise that is responsible for, let's say, a team or several teams that understands exactly how they use a particular application, right? Think of a marketing expert or maybe a sales expert in a particular area of a company, and he wants to do exactly these fields, right? These things, add some custom fields, maybe change the descriptions, the order of fields, remove some fields, and so on. So he should be able to do this without going to IT, right? What he can now do in addition is he can persist these changes as a variant to the original application. So he basically creates a new entity that he can integrate into the Launchpad, right? He can call this particular application and it shows up with a changed version of the screen, right? He can also do this for page variants, which basically is the filters on the page, the way a table looks like, the number of columns you see, and so on. So he can make these changes and persist them as a separate new application that shows up in the Fiori Launchpad, right? For the end user, I just mentioned the important thing is the personalization for tables and filters. So this is something every one of you should be able to do. Remove some columns, change the order of columns. It's what you expect from a modern framework, and this is what we do as well with the Flex services. There's a new story now, and it's a developer story. It means that if you're a developer at a company and you receive these products from SAP, or if you're a developer within SAP, and you have, for example, a Fiori elements-based application, you should be able to somehow improve what you see. Because you get this stuff, usually it's out of the box in a certain shape, but you might want to add or change some business logic, add, let's say, changes to the screens, and you want to do this in a sort of safe way, right? You want to make these changes and decouple it from the lifecycle of the original application so that when SAP ships a new version, your changes are still in place and still working, right? So we thought about what are the APIs, what's the contract between this, and this is now a new story that we're giving to people. And it's based on an adaptation project, something built right here. So who's part of the adaptation project team right here? So you can talk to these guys in the first row. They are working on this project, right? So it's a new type of project in Web IDE where you go in and say you want to adapt an existing application. Then you pick it from the list of apps in your, in this case, ABAP system, right? And then you can make a change and deploy it to the system, and it shows up as a new version, a new variant of the original application. All of this is done by, let's say, referencing the original application in a way, right? Not by overriding it, but just referencing it, and by collecting a set of changes, a set of adaptations that were done on top. So with this separate deployable part of let's say, application project, you can ship all these changes without touching the original application, right? I mentioned before you can now add fields, you can add even XML fragments and plug them into an existing application, which is really nice because you can really enhance the screens with new features and plug them into a particular position on the screen, right? And that is being kept stable as well. And you can go further, you can change control properties, you can add, as I said, XML fragments, but you can even extend the controller code, right? So you could put a button on a screen and you can write controller code that reacts to a click of this button, or even do more complex things, right? And all of this in a secure way, basically. So as I said, if you want to know more, there's a booth at 10:15 right outside where you can learn a bit about this. So for a more technical topic, let's talk about CSP compliance. This is, let's say, it's a security feature. It's called Content Security Policy. It's something that UI5 would like to support. I'll just briefly go over this one because it basically is about telling the browser from where it can load resources. to avoid that in a case of a cross-site scripting attack, attackers could load malicious JavaScript from a remote server and just execute it, right? So in this case, we're trying to be fully compliant to CSP. But in the first phase, what we're doing is we're not allowing inline scripts anymore. Inline scripts is when in an HTML page you have a script and an end script tag, and you basically directly type JavaScript in here. You can do the same also in HTML, where you have in a tag maybe a JavaScript handler, right? This is not going to be supported anymore in the future, right? And there's a simple way to do this or to be compliant with this. Imagine you have such an inline script. You can just take it and actually put it in its own JavaScript file, right? Just put the same code right there and just integrate that JavaScript file instead, yeah? Because this is now a loading that the browser does. It's not inlining, and this is one of the first ways to secure your application. And there are more things to come, and so we roll this out as we achieve this compliance. But this is important. For example, Google approached us, and they wanted us to support this as well, because they're also using UI5, and it's important for them that, let's say, modern UI technology has this in place. Good, now let's come to the main topic of today. It's UI5 evolution, and it's what we've been busy with for the last 1.5 years, really. It's the main innovation project that we have at SAP in terms of UI5 development. And its main challenge was that we wanted to modernize UI5, right? It's been available since 2011, right? So it's been actually around for quite a long time. And over time, we have made some decisions on how we envision this programming model to work, how we envision that somebody writes controls, and what is part of the core. And over time, we noticed that obviously we're writing more and more code. So we did run into issues in terms of the size of code that we have to load. But we also found out that there are some industry trends coming up that we wanted to support. And for this, we understood we have to innovate, right? So this innovation project will also be explained in the session that follows this one at 10:15 in this room, and we'll really tell you all of the details of what we did. But let's briefly have a look at some of the major topics, or let's say some of the major impacts that this can have on an application. UI5 evolution is about speed, it's about perceived performance as well, it's about making stuff show up as quickly as possible. And then to get there, you have to change the way you build applications. We did this, and we now have a bit of an understanding, and we thought we would like to apply this to a product that we own, and it's the Fiori Launchpad, right? So the Fiori Launchpad was our first project where we said we would like to show how evolution looks like. And for this, we thought about what's the biggest problem right now, and it's similar to many applications. Everything happens in the beginning, and everything takes a long time to load, right? Because we throw tons of JavaScript at the browser, and it just needs a long time to parse and compile everything, right? So what we thought is, what's a modern way to look at applications today? Google is driving this topic quite heavily. They're talking about progressive loading of applications, and they're saying there's a couple of things that make an application look good from an end user point of view. The end user typically asks a question like, is it happening, right? When you load an application, you want to see something happening, otherwise you think it's broken, right? Nothing is loading. So is it happening is the first question, and the best response that we can give to the end user is by showing something, right? So we wanted to optimize this display of the background to come up after 400, 500 milliseconds as quickly as possible. So to give the impression that you're right away in this experience, right? Then once this is happening, the user is a bit relaxed already, right? The next question, the important one, is it useful? So is something happening that is, giving the user some sort of interesting content? And Google has this concept of a hero element. A hero element means it's the thing you are waiting for. On YouTube, it's the video. You don't need the last comment to be shown immediately. It's the video you want to see, right? On Facebook, it's maybe the list of content that shows up in your stream. It's not every event and the side sections of the page. These come in later, right? And so we wanted to do the same thing. For FLP, it's the tiles, right? The tiles itself, they can show up in a very simple way, right? Without any graphics, without any KPIs. But the question is it usable? So can I click on a tile, right? And this point in time is very crucial. As soon as I can start an interaction with the application, I'm fine. Like if you can start to play a video, that's what you want to achieve. So this is called a time to interactivity, right? TTI. This is a term in industry that they use to measure the time until this is possible for the end user. And it's the crucial time when you can interact and start an app, you're fine. If you do not need to click right away, you can do a progressive enhancement of the current page. So you can add KPIs and more information, right, as the browser has time to load and parse everything, and then just show it on the page. And then on the top, if you notice right and left, more and more functionality is added, right? It's added as we go along, but the user is not really waiting for it. He's probably just waiting to get to some application or so, right? So this is what we did. And this is a really, really slowed down version of everything that's happening. But it's important because in slow networks, this is what you see as an experience one after the other, right? In fast environments, it's barely noticeable. So once this is reached, we said additional functionality like the notifications or the Me area, we will only load them when the user tells us to. So only when he clicks on a button, then we'll actually bring in this content and not before, right? To just have a best experience. This is also part of evolution thinking in these sort of steps, not taking everything like, loading everything in the very beginning and slowing down the performance, but thinking how does the user experience the application? And we give you now the tools to build something like that. Good, now it's visually complete, we're done. Okay. I'll actually skip the demo. It's basically just showing the screen very fast. So you can imagine how this is, but we have a bit of a time constraint today. So let's look at evolution insights. This is what we actually try to do. And again, at 10:15, we'll talk about the details. So I'll sort of recap this briefly. In 2017, we announced that we would ship all of these, let's say, parts of what we call UI5 evolution. It's about a new architecture, layering the parts and not having one monolithic overall, right? But actually putting in a structure where we can decouple certain aspects of UI5. It's about deprecating certain things that we have had in the past. Synchronous calls, for example, block the browser completely, really bad. So we wanted to get rid of them and have asynchronous APIs for everything. We needed to get rid of jQuery. Right? When we used it in 2011, it was the best thing around. It still is popular today, but we have it as a dependency in levels where it should not belong. Right? Even the core has a dependency to jQuery, or had one. It's now gone. Right? So this was an important step forward. We also wanted to invest into build tooling, right? Because the build experience in UI5 was, let's say, outdated, right? We have had build toolings that were good at the time, but people expect command line, Node.js, just an NPM-based, like modern experience, right? And this is what we wanted to achieve as well. In terms of rendering and controls, we wanted to be less connected to, let's say, the programming model of UI5, to the data binding, and to just have something that feels more lightweight, that's more modern than what we used to do. And then in terms of programming models, we have, of course, the UI5 classic programming model, but we would always like to be open towards new trends, right? And this was another aspect that we were working on. So if we take a look at the single pieces, let's take a look at the build and development tooling. And this is maybe one of the coolest things, really, that we've done. And we'll have a demo. Aline will come up on stage and show you a bit how this build and development tooling looks like. It's really easy to use, so have a look at this demo. Can we switch to the laptop? Yeah. Oh, you did.
Thanks, Frederic. So I'll just run through a quick demo of what we are trying to achieve in the build tooling. So for this demo, I already have a sample UI5 application that's called the UI5 jump and run, and I am there in that repository. So to start with the UI5 build tooling, the first thing that you need to do is you need to have the command line interface. So I'll just copy the command. It's called the npm install with the global parameter, and it's @UI5 CLI. So this will configure my machine so that I can use the UI5 build commands on top of that. So it was already installed. It just took a couple of seconds to update it. Now once this is installed, we need to configure this particular application so that it can use the UI5 build tooling. It's just a one-time process, and it's called the UI5 init. And as you can see, it says it wrote the UI5 YAML to the repository over here, UI5 jump and run. And what it does is it identifies this particular thing as an application. So either you can use an application or a library. So in this case, based on the source code, it's recognized as an application. Now I'll use the UI5 tree command. So you can see that here it just has few parameters like the ID, the version, the path, and right now we have not installed any dependencies over here, but since it's a UI5 application, we need to install the UI5 libraries over here. So I'll just copy the command for this, and yes, it uses the UI5 SAP M, SAP UI Core, layout, and the Belize theme. So it's now installed, and now if I go to the UI5 tree command again, yes, you can see the entire dependency tree, like the ones we installed, and it also calculates internally the dependencies that these libraries have. And now I'll open the development server with the UI5 serve and an O parameter. It will directly launch the server. So this is the file system, and here if I serve the index.html, it should load the application. Yep, so this is a really cool application built with UI5, and you can download it from the repository and play. So that's all, a short demo on the UI5 build tooling. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So what's important to understand here is that we now have published all of these UI5, the open UI5 modules to NPM in the public NPM repository, right? And when she did the install, this really meant you download the source code onto your local machine, and with a one-liner you have a server running, right? With a one-liner you can enable existing applications to run with this tooling. And it's really simple. I mean, these 4 lines of code is all you need to get started if you have nothing on your machine so far. No UI5 install at all, right? So very good. I think this is a major piece in advancing UI5. Can we go please back to the slide? Excuse me, guys? Yeah, okay. So, as I said, we are out with the source code on NPM, but also the build tooling is public on GitHub, right? It's also an open source project and is available there. So there's a session this afternoon. Marlene and myself will talk about this in more detail and show you all of the different things you can do with this, how to build, how to develop with this tooling at 2:15. So the next stop is the modular core. And just in brief terms, this really meant for us taking something that was a monolith, right? The core was one large, let's say, set of functionalities, many different types of models, a lot of code really that you didn't always need in every application. And it had just grown and grown and grown over the years. And we decided that we had to do something about this, right? So the goals of this project were to achieve speed, right? To be fast with UI5 in terms of loading everything. We needed to be modular to do this. That means we took the core and split it into separate pieces and declared sort of the dependencies between these pieces, right? To be able to say, or to allow an application to just take certain parts of it and not the whole, right? For example, you have a data model like an OData version 2, there's a version 4 model, there's a JSON model, there's an XML model. Typically, you don't need all 4 in every application. You might only need one of them. So now you can say, this is what I need. And the rest of the code, you don't have to load anymore, right? Before, it was all basically one large bundle. So modularity is important. We also wanted to be future-proof. That means that we needed to accept there are certain changes in modern JavaScript, and the way you want to write this. So we wanted to be compatible with this in the future. And we did a lot of changes as well in terms of how the modules are structured. We now support AMD-like syntax, the standard module loading concept in many web applications these days. So we sort of transferred everything into this de facto standard, right? And now all the modules are let's say, modern and we hope future-proof. We wanted to be open. We showed you all of the tooling is open source. So everything that we do here is actually happening outside on public GitHub, and we encourage everybody to work with us on these topics. One of the biggest problems, however, is we needed to be fully compatible. And compatibility is something that we've, ensured our stakeholders that when we do something, even something radical like UI5 evolution, your applications still work, right? You don't have to touch the code. Obviously, if you touch the code, they run faster. But if you don't touch the code, it still works. And this compatibility is something quite difficult. So again, in the session right afterwards, we'll show you some of the things we needed to do to get this working. And if you're interested, have a look at this. So another major component was how UI5 deals with loading resources. And loading resources really means that if you have a statement in your code that says, I need a button control or I need a particular function, and assuming that is not yet available on the client, how does UI5 deal with this situation? In the past, this meant it would stop everything, send a synchronous request, get the JavaScript, compile it, parse it, and do everything, and then you had access to the code. And this basically stopped processing in certain times. The same happened in a lot of other circumstances, yeah? And we'll show you later on how you can get now around these problems. But the basic functionality, how UI5 itself in the core loads these assets, was now improved as well. So we have a new loader, we call it. It's the base functionality that does all of these request handlings, and it's built to be compliant with AMD. You can configure it to run fully asynchronously, and if you do so, then really the browser can do what I showed you before in this demo of the Launchpad. It can render really fast because it's not blocking the processing of CSS by fetching files from the backend, right? It's happening in parallel, really. And this is one of the real big foundations for having this sort of speed boost to applications. What you can see here in this network trace, if you look at the third column, it says protocol, right? And it says H2. This is HTTP2. It's a modern way how browsers can fetch files. If you know that the browser typically has 6 connections open and can send 6 requests in parallel, right? And then it's stopped, right? Every additional request has to wait until they're being processed. With HTTP2, what you can do is you can basically tell the backend to load 100 files, but it will all be multiplexed with one TCP connection, right? So it basically feels like getting a stream of a bundle of code back, right? It's happening via one connection, but it's only possible if all of these XHR requests that you send are asynchronous. And as you can see here in this trace, this is showing that all of these single requests were done in an asynchronous fashion and could thus leverage the power of HTTP2, right? And this is important because if you, for example, want to use a UI5 application within something like a Chrome plugin, it's only possible if it's all asynchronous. They don't allow synchronous requests anymore. So this was another thing we wanted to achieve. And with this, we're really close. We have 1 or 2 internal APIs that we still need to make asynchronous. But in principle, this is the goal, to have the full application running in an asynchronous fashion. So for rendering and controls, I mentioned before that we wanted to optimize this as well, create a more modern control framework than what we had in the past. And the controls work fine, the ones that we have, but they are really tightly coupled to, let's say, some of the fundamental programming model aspects of UI5, the way you can access from a renderer the control instance and call its APIs and stuff. So this didn't really feel too decoupled, let's say, right? So we wanted to have this declarative, working in any environment, still have the themable controls and stuff. And what we did there was the introduction of something we call a lightweight control. It's a new way how we can create controls these days. UI5 Classic, as you know it, can use these controls. The rendering technology we used to have in the past was string streaming. That means a renderer would basically concatenate HTML strings, and at the end, all of these strings were combined and sent to the browser to inject into a particular element on the screen, and the browser then renders this, right? This was really fast, and the best thing to do 6-7 years ago. It was faster than DOM manipulation, but meanwhile, the browsers have sort of caught up, right? And there are different ways how to update the screen now. So the controls are still a renderer and a behavior and CSS. There's now a render context, which basically means you get a snapshot of all of the properties of a control passed into a layer that takes this and a declarative renderer and can now optimize the rendering. We use We use lit HTML for this to update the DOM in particular pieces, right? It's a very modern way. We think that this is the future-proof way to take this to the next level. For this, we would like to have something called a rendering core. So it's pieces of the core which you need exclusively to render content to the screen. Right? It's like a subset of the functionality that you just need for this purpose. And with this in place, we can now also have a new API on top. This is the UI5 Web Components API. Web Components is an industry standard. Many browsers support it already today. And we'll have a quick demo of what Web Components look like and how they feel. So Ram will take you through this one. Yeah. Good, and this was still on. Okay, perfect. So let's switch to the laptop again.
Okay, that's a good start.
Yeah, maybe we close this tab. Good.
Okay, so thank you, Frederic, and as he mentioned, we are also developing some of the lightweight controls, so you can use this in UI5 as well as using UI5 Web Component API. So these are the first set of controls that we have. If you see, the code is more like HTML. So we have a tag like SAP button, and the icon property, whatever we used to give in a declarative manner, now we can give it as a property. So this, when I'm giving it as SAP icon / employee, so this is how the button is now rendered. You can use these kind of approach. It is not only about the button, but we have also included some other controls like toggle button and checkbox, radio button, and the links and all these things. So one of the very first requirement for us to give the the date picker control as well. So this is one of the complex control that we have included right now. You can see it is just again declared with one tag SAP date picker, and then you're giving ID and as well as the value. Let's see how it works. So I'll click on this right now. You can see that it is not just the input, the normal HTML input, date input. It is from UI5 control. So you can select the date, and the one more thing that we have included is that you can now even navigate with the keyboard. So this is one of the cool stuff that we did. If you look at other controls, we have dialog, title, and one more thing, you can see it here. So here we have a panel. And in this SAP panel, you can see that we have also included some of the HTML tags. So you can use SAP lightweight controls along with the HTML tags as well. So this is an update from lightweight controls. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Good. So, yes.
Thank you.
This is really a huge step, right? I mean, this means you can take all of the control assets that we have and make them available directly in HTML, right? There's no more UI5 programming model, no XML views on this page. You plug them in like any other HTML tag, but they bring all of the UX qualities, all of the themability, all of the behavior of the controls that you know from UI5 into any other worlds. And let's have a look at this. Can we go back to the slides for a second? So we talk quickly about the programming models, right? And this is exactly where this belongs. We wanted to also support other programming models than the UI5 Classic, right? So UI5 Classic, all of you know. But you know, in the industry, there are a number of other competitors that are doing something similar to our data binding, let's say, in a way, right? So there's Angular, there's React, there's Vue.js coming up, and to be honest, those will go away and new will come in, right? Because that's how it goes. Every 2 years, there's a new framework coming up. So this is why we said we will not directly support any of these frameworks, but indirectly via saying we go back to HTML and to the web components, because they can be used in all of them. And the ones to come in the future, right? So we are, again, future-proof, hopefully, by this approach. And we have just a few minutes left. Should we, yeah. I think in terms of time, we probably do this later on in the next session, yeah. Or we will show the programming model aspects again and show, yeah, a demo. I think we'll skip it for now, yeah. To be in time. So let's say to sum this up, right? I talked a lot about the different things we did, and we worked quite hard over the years to make this possible. So all of the asynchronous APIs, the way we now deal with loading applications, all of this is only possible if something is also done in the application space. Right, and on this slide it says, what's the nature of evolution, right? The nature of evolution is sometimes things need to die, right? They need to vanish, and this is the old code, right? It's the legacy APIs, it's the synchronous way of handling things. So what we need you to do is we need you to stop using these deprecated synchronous APIs, to declare dependencies between modules, right? Because then our build tooling can pick this up and create these optimized bundles of code, right? Mastering asynchronous programming is a challenge, right? It's something that needs to be understood how it works, but it's important for the future. And this is the foundation for this progressive loading, that you understand how to code, so this is then made possible. Orchestrate your code execution, right? Think about when you need to load certain aspects of the application. Don't do everything in the very beginning. It's important to do this, right? So we need you to understand these topics, and we will bring you some more content right afterwards. What exactly does it mean? How do you need to change your code? So if you want 10, 15, you can stay here to listen to this. It's right here on the Audimax. Ram and myself will show you. And with this, I think I'm just barely over time. So thank you very much for your attention, and have a great day.